I found out at a funeral that my entire family framed me for embezzlement, destroyed my life on purpose, and laughed about it for years while I rotted in prison. I need to tell you something that's been eating me alive for the past 3 months, something so twisted, so calculated, that even now, sitting here typing this out, my hands are shaking. My name is Marcus. I'm 38 years old, and I just discovered that every single person in my family conspired to destroy my life, and they enjoyed every second of it. Let me take you back to where this nightmare started. I was 26 years old, working as a junior accountant at my Uncle Richard's construction supply company. Uncle Richard wasn't just my mother's brother. He was supposedly the family patriarch, the successful one, the man everyone looked up to. The company had been doing well. Contracts with the city, steady cash flow, the whole deal. I was grateful for the job, you know. Fresh out of college, student loans breathing down my neck, and family gave me a shot when nobody else would. The company had about 15 employees back then. Nothing huge, but solid. I handled accounts payable, some bookkeeping, basic stuff. My cousin Derek, Richard's son, was the operations manager. My other cousin Michelle handled HR and payroll. It was a real family affair, and I was just happy to be part of something, to belong somewhere. Everything changed on a Tuesday in March. I remember the exact date because it was my girlfriend Sarah's birthday, and I had plans to take her to that Italian place she loved. I was wrapping up work around 4 in the afternoon when Uncle Richard called me into his office. His face was gray, absolutely drained of color. Derek and Michelle were already there, along with the company's lawyer, a man named Gerald Hutchins, who I'd met maybe twice before. Richard didn't waste time. He told me the company was being audited, and they'd found discrepancies, big ones. Nearly $200,000 had vanished from the operating accounts over the past 18 months. He said it with this heavy voice, like he was delivering news of a death. I remember laughing nervously, asking what this had to do with me. That's when Gerald slid a folder across the desk. Inside were bank statements, transfer records, withdrawal slips. All of them had my employee ID associated with them. All of them were transactions I'd never seen before in my life. I felt my stomach drop through the floor. I started explaining frantically that I'd never made these transactions, that someone must have used my credentials, that this was obviously a mistake. Uncle Richard just sat there, head in his hands. Derek wouldn't even look at me. Michelle was crying softly in the corner. Gerald explained that the evidence was conclusive. The transfers had been made from my computer terminal. During hours I was logged in, using security protocols only I had access to. He said the company had a choice. They could report this to the police, or I could cooperate with an internal resolution. The way he said cooperate made my skin crawl, but I was too panicked to fully process it. Uncle Richard finally looked up at me, tears in his eyes, and said the words that would haunt me forever. He said, "Marcus, you're like a son to me, which is why this is killing me inside. We want to help you. We want to keep this in the family, but you need to be honest with us. You need to tell us why you did this." I tried to protest again, but Richard cut me off. He said the evidence was overwhelming, that fighting it would only make things worse, that if this went to criminal court I'd be looking at serious prison time. But if I cooperated, if I signed some papers and agreed to certain terms, they could handle it quietly. I'd lose my job, obviously, and I'd need to make restitution. But we could avoid destroying my whole life over this. I was drowning, absolutely drowning in confusion and terror. Sarah was calling my phone wondering where I was. My hands were numb. Gerald kept pushing papers in front of me, talking about liability and criminal exposure and protective agreements. My family, my blood, surrounded me in that office, and every single one of them told me that signing was the smart move. So I signed. God help me. I signed everything they put in front of me. I admitted to theft I didn't commit. I agreed to a repayment plan for money I never took. I waived my right to contest the findings. I did all of this because these people were my family, and some naive part of me believed they were protecting me from something worse. They weren't. Within a week, the story had leaked. Not to the police. Richard kept that promise at least. But somehow, word got out in our tight-knit community. The family's church knew. The neighborhood knew. Sarah's parents called her, strongly suggesting she reconsider our relationship because I was clearly unstable and criminal. My parents, my own parents, sat me down with these disappointed, heartbroken expressions and asked me how I could have done this to Uncle Richard, to the family, to them. I tried to explain that I hadn't done it, that something was wrong with the whole situation, But my father shut me down. He said I'd signed a confession, that the evidence was clear, and that the least I could do was own up to it like a man instead of making excuses. My mother just cried and said she didn't raise a thief. Sarah left me 2 weeks later. She didn't even do it in person, just left a note on the apartment counter saying she couldn't be with someone she didn't trust. I don't blame her for that. I really don't. From her perspective, I'd stolen a huge amount of money and lied about it to everyone. The family's support, that careful protection Richard had promised, turned out to be a cage. They'd show up occasionally. Richard and Derek, sometimes Michelle. They'd take me to coffee, ask how I was holding up, slip me a little cash for groceries. But there were always strings attached, always subtle reminders that they were helping me, that they were being generous by not pressing charges, that I owed them everything. Derek got drunk one night about 2 months after it all went down, showed up at my apartment at midnight. I thought he was there to finally talk honestly, brother to brother, cousin to cousin. Instead, he told me I'd better keep my mouth shut about the internal investigation, that if I ever tried to claim innocence publicly, they'd release the signed confession to the police, and I'd be prosecuted to the fullest extent. He said it like a threat wrapped in concern, like he was doing me a favor by warning me. I couldn't find work anywhere. Every job application died the moment they called my references, the moment my previous employment came up. Uncle Richard owned the narrative completely. I spiraled into depression, started drinking too much, lost the apartment. I ended up living in my car for 6 months, showering at a gym I could barely afford, eating 1 meal a day. My family never stopped checking in, though. That was the cruelest part. They'd call every few weeks, ask how I was doing, occasionally invite me to family dinners where everyone would be carefully, painfully nice to me while treating me like broken glass, like I was the damaged one who needed to be handled with kid gloves. They'd say things like, "We forgive you," or "Everyone makes mistakes," or "We still love you, Marcus." And I'd sit there, dying inside, knowing I hadn't done anything wrong but unable to prove it. Years passed like that. I eventually found work doing overnight security, jobs that didn't care much about your past as long as you showed up. I got a studio apartment in the bad part of town. I existed, but I didn't live. Every family gathering was torture. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, birthdays. They'd all act so supportive, so loving, while I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I stopped dating entirely. How do you explain to someone that you're a confessed thief who's actually innocent? That your own family destroyed your reputation but still pretends to care about you? You don't. You just stay alone. My younger sister Emily was the only one who ever seemed conflicted. She'd catch my eye at family events with this strange expression, guilty almost, but she never said anything, never pulled me aside, never questioned the narrative. I told myself she was just keeping the peace, that she loved me but didn't want to cause family drama. Uncle Richard died 3 months ago. Massive heart attack, dead before the ambulance arrived. He was 68 years old. The funeral was huge, packed with business associates, family friends, people from the old neighborhood. I stood in the back during the service, wearing my only suit that was now 12 years old and didn't fit quite right anymore. The reception was held at Derek's house, this beautiful place in the suburbs with a pool and a wine cellar. I almost didn't go, but my mother had specifically called and said it would mean a lot to the family if I showed up, that Richard would have wanted it, so I went. I spent most of the reception in the corner, nursing a beer, watching everyone else mingle and share memories. Derek had really opened up the bar, and people were drinking heavily, the way people do when they're avoiding grief. By 9 o'clock, the party had split into smaller groups scattered around the house. I stepped out onto the back patio to get some air. Maybe leave quietly, without making a scene. The patio doors were those heavy sliding glass ones, and I was about to close mine when I heard voices coming from the side patio, around the corner and out of sight. I recognized them immediately. Derek, Michelle, my parents, my Aunt Carol, and Emily. They were drunk. Really drunk, and they were laughing. I froze with my hand on the door. Something about their tone stopped me cold. Derek's voice came first, slightly slurred but clear. I still can't believe how perfectly Marcus took the fall. Like, I was nervous as hell at first, but he just signed everything. Michelle laughed, that high-pitched giggle she does when she's hammered. I know, right? Gerald said it was the cleanest setup he'd ever seen. All those fake login records, the backdated transfers. Marcus never had a chance. My hand went numb on the door handle. My father's voice next. Richard felt bad about it sometimes, especially near the end. But what choice did we have? The business was hemorrhaging money from that lawsuit, and someone had to take the hit. Marcus was the obvious choice, Aunt Carol said matter-of-factly. Single, no kids, young enough to recover eventually. It's not like we picked him randomly. My mother spoke up, her voice slightly defensive. And we've taken care of him since. We've made sure he didn't end up completely destroyed. Barely, Emily said quietly. He lives in a shithole and works nights as a security guard. His entire life is gone. Oh, don't start with the guilt again, Derek snapped. He's fine. He's alive. He still gets invited to family stuff. It could have been so much worse. Could have been one of us, Michelle added. Could have been me or Derek actually going to prison for moving that money offshore. Instead, Marcus signed a confession and we got to restructure everything clean. I realized I wasn't breathing. My lungs had simply stopped working. The timing was perfect too, my father continued. Right after Marcus started dating that Sarah girl. He was so eager to prove himself, so desperate to be the good employee. Made him easy to manipulate. I still think the crying was overkill, Derek laughed. Michelle, you should have won an Oscar for that performance in The Office. Please, Michelle shot back. Your dad was the real actor. All that "you're like a son to me" bullshit. I almost believed it myself. They all laughed. They all fucking laughed. We should drink to it, Aunt Carol suggested. To Richard for having the balls to do what needed to be done, and to Marcus for being exactly stupid enough to trust us. To Marcus, they chorused, and I heard glasses clinking. Emily didn't say anything for a moment, then quietly added, I just hope he never finds out. He won't, Derek said confidently. He's had 12 years to figure it out and hasn't. Marcus isn't smart enough to question it. He never was. That's why he was perfect. I don't remember moving. I don't remember walking back through the house or getting in my car. I drove home on autopilot, my mind completely blank except for their voices playing on repeat. The laughing, the casual cruelty, the planning. When I got back to my studio apartment, I sat on the floor and stayed there until sunrise. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just sat there as the full scope of my life rearranged itself into something worse than I could have imagined. They'd framed me deliberately. Every single person in my family had participated in destroying my life to save themselves and their money. The construction company hadn't been audited. There was no random discovery of theft. They'd manufactured the entire thing, created fake evidence, manipulated me into signing a confession, and then spent 12 years pretending to support me out of love, when really they were just making sure I stayed silent. Uncle Richard had stolen from his own company. Or maybe it was Derek and Michelle, the details didn't matter. What mattered was that they'd needed a fall guy, and they'd chosen me because I was disposable, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I was the most expendable body in the room. My sister had known. My parents had known. Everyone had known, and they'd all agreed that sacrificing me was acceptable. The supportive phone calls, the occasional cash, the family dinner invitations, it was all just insurance, a way to keep me grateful. Keep me from asking too many questions. Keep me isolated and dependent enough that I'd never push back against the narrative they'd built. I called in sick to work that week, then the next week. I stopped answering my phone when family members called. My mother left concerned voicemails asking if I was all right. If I'd been at the funeral reception because she hadn't seen me leave. The audacity of her concern made me want to vomit. I spent those 2 weeks doing something I should have done 12 years ago. I started digging into the original case, into the evidence Gerald had shown me. I filed Freedom of Information requests. I contacted the software company that handled the security systems at Uncle Richard's business. I paid a lawyer $300 I didn't have for a consultation about what I'd signed all those years ago. The lawyer looked over the documents and went pale. He told me that the agreement I'd signed wasn't legally binding in several ways, that it had been deliberately written to be vague enough that it couldn't be used in actual court, that it was essentially a prop to scare me into silence. He asked me if I'd ever actually been charged with a crime. I hadn't. There was no criminal record, no official investigation. The whole thing had existed entirely within the family and their constructed narrative. The security company still had records from 12 years ago because of some data retention policy. For $200, they send me login reports from the relevant time period. The transfers that supposedly happened from my terminal had actually been made remotely, from IP addresses that weren't even in the same state. Someone had used my credentials, sure, but they'd done it from Derek's home computer and Michelle's laptop. I'd been framed by people who barely bothered to cover their tracks because they never imagined I'd check. I documented everything. I recorded my conversations with the lawyer and the security company. I wrote down every detail I could remember from the original confrontation in Richard's office. I made copies of the signed confession and the repayment agreement, highlighting every vague and legally questionable section. Then I went to the police. Not the local cops who played poker with my uncle. I drove 2 hours to the state police headquarters and asked to speak to someone in financial crimes. I brought my folder of evidence, and I told them everything. The detective who listened to my story was a woman named Sarah Patterson, which felt like some kind of cosmic joke given my ex's name. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, and she didn't interrupt me once during the hour it took to explain everything. When I played her the recording from the funeral reception on my phone, her expression hardened into something that might have been fury. She told me to wait. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room with Patterson and 2 other detectives, going through everything again in even more detail. They asked questions I couldn't answer, details I didn't know, but they seemed more interested in what I could prove than what I couldn't. Patterson finally leaned back in her chair and said, "Mr. Morright, Holloway, I'm going to be straight with you. This is going to be complicated. The statute of limitations on the original theft might be an issue, and you did sign a confession, even under duress. But fraud, conspiracy, identity theft for the purpose of financial gain, those have different limitations, and if we can prove they've been actively maintaining this fraud for 12 years, that extends things considerably." She paused, choosing her words carefully. The recording from the funeral is a problem for them. It's not admissible in court on its own because they didn't know they were being recorded, but it gives us probable cause to investigate. And once we start pulling at this thread, I suspect we're going to find a lot more. It took 3 months. 3 months of investigators combing through Uncle Richard's business records, interviewing former employees, subpoenaing bank records. 3 months of me living in this surreal limbo, where my family had no idea what was coming. They kept calling. I'd answer occasionally, just to keep up appearances. My mother would ask how I was if I'd been feeling better. When I'd come to dinner again, I'd make excuses and she'd sound hurt, and I'd feel that old familiar guilt starting to rise before remembering what she'd done. Derek called me once, drunk again, and told me he'd been thinking about me. He said he hoped I knew how much the family loved me, how much Richard had loved me. He said Richard had left me something in his will, a small amount, and they'd be distributing it soon. I asked how much. He said $5,000. $5,000 for 12 years of my life. For my reputation, my relationships, my future. $5,000 like it was generous. I thanked him and hung up. The arrests happened on a Thursday morning. I wasn't there, but Patterson called me immediately afterward to tell me. Derek, Michelle, my father, my mother, and Carol, Gerald the lawyer, all arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, falsifying business records, and about a dozen other charges I couldn't keep straight. Emily wasn't arrested. Patterson told me that Emily had agreed to cooperate with investigators and had provided significant evidence in exchange for immunity. Apparently, she'd kept emails from the planning stages, text messages between family members coordinating the frame job. She'd held on to everything out of guilt, but had been too afraid to come forward until the police showed up asking questions. I didn't know how to feel about that. Still don't. The local news picked up the story within hours. Former business owner and family members arrested for elaborate fraud scheme that destroyed innocent man's life. My phone exploded with messages. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters wanting statements. Old friends from 12 years ago suddenly remembering I existed. Sarah, my ex-girlfriend, called me crying. She'd seen the news. She apologized over and over, said she should have believed me, that she'd been wrong. I told her it was okay, that I didn't blame her. But we both knew I'd never see her again. That part of my life was dead. The trial took almost a year to work through the system. I had to testify, had to sit in a courtroom while my family's lawyers tried to tear apart my character, tried to suggest I'd known about the scheme all along, that I'd been complicit. Michelle cried on the stand, said she'd been coerced by Richard and Derek. My father claimed he'd been protecting me from worse consequences. My mother said she'd only gone along because my father insisted. They all tried to save themselves by throwing each other under the bus. and it was almost satisfying to watch them turn on each other the way they'd once united against me. Derek got 8 years, Michelle got 6, my father got 5. My mother got 3, suspended to 18 months plus probation. And Carol got 4 years. Gerald lost his law license and got 7 years for his role in fabricating the evidence. Emily testified for the prosecution. She cried through most of it, explained how Richard had pitched the plan after a disastrous business deal had left the company on the verge of bankruptcy, how they'd needed someone to blame for the missing money before real auditors got involved, how they'd chosen me specifically because I was young, single, had no children, and was desperate to prove myself worthy of family approval. She said my father had been the one to suggest using my login credentials. My mother had suggested the repayment plan to make it look legitimate. Derek and Michelle had created the fake transaction records. Richard had played the heartbroken uncle. Gerald had drafted the legally meaningless confession. It had taken them less than a week to plan my destruction. The civil suit came after the criminal trial. My lawyer, a different one who'd agreed to work on contingency because the case was high profile, went after everyone. The settlements were substantial: Derek and Michelle's assets, my parents' retirement accounts, Richard's estate. The construction company itself had long since been sold, but we went after the proceeds. I ended up with about $1.2 million after legal fees. It sounds like a lot. It's not enough, it never could be. But it's something. I moved out of state immediately, changed my phone number, deleted all social media. I started over in a small city where nobody knew my name or my story. I got a job doing normal accounting work again. Started with a small firm that was willing to overlook my 12-year employment gap once I explained what had happened. I got promoted within 2 years. I'm good in my job. I always was. I started dating again, cautiously. Met a woman named Rachel who's a teacher, kind, patient, doesn't push me to talk about things I'm not ready to discuss. I told her my history on our 4th date, expected her to run. She just held my hand and said that what happened to me was unforgivable, and that she was glad I'd survived it. I'm in therapy twice a week. I'm working through the trust issues, the paranoia, the deep-seated belief that anyone who shows me kindness must have ulterior motives. It's slow going. Emily reached out 6 months ago, sent a letter to my lawyer's office since she didn't have my address. She apologized. Said she knew it wasn't enough, that she'd been a coward, that she'd let me suffer for years because she was afraid of the family's reaction. She said she understood if I never wanted to speak to her again. I haven't responded. I don't know if I will. My parents' letters arrived regularly for the first year after their sentencing. My mother's were desperate, begging for forgiveness, claiming she'd been manipulated by my father. My father's were angry, accusatory, suggesting I destroyed the family by going to the police, that I should have just let it go. I burned them all without reading past the first few lines. Derek's letter was different. It came about 18 months into his sentence. No apologies, no excuses. Just one line that I think about sometimes late at night. You were supposed to stay broken. That's what it comes down to, I think. They didn't just frame me for theft. They carefully, methodically broke me down over 12 years. Kept me isolated and grateful for scraps, convinced me I was damaged and lucky to have their support. They needed me to believe I was guilty, to internalize the shame so completely that I'd never question the narrative. And it almost worked. If I hadn't been at that funeral, if Derek hadn't left that patio door unlocked, if they hadn't gotten drunk enough to drop their masks, I'd still be living in that studio apartment, still working night security, still showing up to family dinners where everyone pretended to love me while privately congratulating themselves on the perfect crime. The thing that haunts me most isn't the betrayal itself. It's the realization of how completely disposable I was to them. I wasn't framed because I'd done something to deserve it, because I'd wronged someone, because of any choice I'd made. I was framed because I was convenient, because I trusted easily, because I wanted to belong to them so badly that I'd sign anything they put in front of me. I think about that young man sometimes. 26-year-old Marcus sitting in Richard's office, scared and confused, signing away his future because his family told him to. I want to go back and shake him, tell him to run, to fight, to question everything, but I can't. That Marcus is gone. He died in that office, and I'm just what crawled out of the grave 12 years later. The criminal justice system gave me some measure of vindication. The civil suits gave me financial compensation, but nothing gives me back those 12 years. Nothing undoes the loneliness, the shame, the self-hatred that became my constant companions. Nothing restores the person I could have been. I'm building something new now, a life that's mine, but it's built on scorched earth. Everything I had before is ash. Every relationship, every memory, every moment of childhood happiness is tainted by the knowledge of what was really happening underneath. People ask me sometimes if I've forgiven them. Therapists, well-meaning friends, Rachel once when we've been dating for 6 months. I don't know how to answer that. Forgiveness implies that what they did was wrong but understandable. That it came from a place of human weakness that can be reconciled with continued love. What they did wasn't human weakness. It was calculated sacrifice. They sat around, probably at a family dinner table, and discussed whose life was most expendable. They weighed options like they were deciding what car to buy, and they chose me because I loved them enough to trust them, which in their calculus made me perfectly stupid. That's not something you forgive. That's something you survive. Derek was released 3 months ago on good behavior. He served just over 5 years of his 8-year sentence. I know because Rachel, who's better at internet stalking than I am, found his release notice and asked if I wanted to know. I said yes because I'd rather know where the monsters are than pretend they don't exist. He tried to contact me through Facebook Messenger, a message request from a bare-bones profile that was probably set up specifically to reach me. I didn't read it. I just blocked it and moved on with my day. My mother got out after 14 months. She violated her probation within 6 weeks by trying to contact me through a mutual acquaintance, and ended up serving another 4 months. She's out now, living with Aunt Carol, who served her full sentence and got out last year. My father is still inside. He'll be there for another year at least. I hope every day feels like a lifetime. Michelle got released early too. Some kind of program for nonviolent offenders. I heard through the grapevine that she moved across the country, changed her name, started over. Good for her, I guess. At least she had the sense to run away from the wreckage. Gerald, the lawyer, was disbarred and served his full sentence. Last I heard, he's working as a paralegal under his wife's maiden name. The State Bar Association used his case as an example in ethics training, a cautionary tale about lawyers who prioritize money over professional integrity. The construction company that Uncle Richard built, that he used as the reason to destroy my life, was sold for parts during the criminal investigation. The name is gone. The building is a dentist's office now. Sometimes I drive past it when I visit the old city, which isn't often, just to remind myself that even institutions that seem permanent can disappear. Richard himself escaped earthly justice by dying before any of this came out. Sometimes I'm angry about that. That he never had to face what he did. Never had to sit in a courtroom and watch his family fall apart. Never spent a single day in prison. But then I remember that he died believing he'd gotten away with it. Believing his perfect crime had held, never knowing that his death was what unraveled everything. Maybe that's enough. Maybe not. The money from the settlements is sitting mostly untouched in investment accounts. I took enough to buy a modest house, paid cash so I'd never have to worry about a mortgage. I took enough to furnish it simply, to buy a reliable car, to build an emergency fund that could last years. The rest just accumulates interest while I figure out what kind of life I want to build with it. Rachel thinks I should donate some to causes that help wrongly convicted people, and she's probably right. I'm not ready yet. Having that money feels like holding proof that I was right, that I didn't deserve what happened, that they were wrong. Letting go of it feels like letting go of that validation, and I'm not there yet. Therapy is helping. My therapist, Dr. Chen, doesn't push me to forgive or forget. She just helps me process, helps me understand that trust is something I can rebuild carefully, selectively, with people who earn it through consistent action over time. She reminds me that what happened doesn't define me, even though it changed me. I'm working on believing that. Some days are good. I go to work, do my job well, come home to Rachel, who's usually covered in paint or glitter from her classroom projects. We cook dinner together, watch terrible reality TV, laugh at stupid jokes. Those evenings feel normal, like maybe I'm actually building something real. Other days I wake up and the weight of it all pins me to the bed. The rage comes out of nowhere, swallows me whole. I imagine scenarios where I confront them individually, where I make them truly understand what they took from me. I imagine violence sometimes, which scares me, though Dr. Jen says it's normal to have those thoughts and important that I'm not acting on them. The nightmares are less frequent now, but still come. Dreams where I'm back in Richard's office signing those papers. But this time I can see their faces clearly and they're all smiling. Dreams where I'm at family dinners and everyone is speaking in unison, chanting that I'm disposable, that I'm worthless, that I was always meant to be the sacrifice. I wake up from those gasping, and Rachel holds me until the panic passes. The hardest part, the thing I struggle with most, is the question of why. Not why they framed me. I understand that sickeningly well. But why they couldn't just let me go afterward. Why they had to keep me close, keep pretending, keep twisting the knife for 12 years. Dr. Chen has theories. She thinks they needed me to stay broken to assuage their guilt, that if I'd somehow thrived despite everything, it would have forced them to confront what they'd done. She thinks the periodic check-ins and family dinners were about control, making sure I stayed in my assigned role as the damaged one, the charity case, the cautionary tale. She's probably right, but it still doesn't make sense to me on a human level. These were people who changed my diapers, taught me to ride a bike, celebrated my birthdays. At what point does someone become so comfortable with their own cruelty that they can maintain it for over a decade? I don't have an answer to that. I don't think I ever will. What I do have is this new life, fragile and strange, built on the ruins of the old one. I have Rachel, who knows everything and stays anyway. I have work that challenges me and coworkers who respect me. I have a house with a garden that I'm slowly learning to maintain. I have therapy appointments and medication that keeps the worst of the depression at bay. I have hobbies I'm rediscovering, books I'm reading, movies I'm watching. I have a future, which is more than I had 3 years ago when I was living in that studio apartment, convinced I deserved my isolation. The family, what's left of it, exists now only as scattered individuals serving sentences or trying to rebuild under new identities. The unit that destroyed me doesn't exist anymore. I helped make sure of that, and I'm not sorry. Emily's letter sits in a drawer in my home office. I take it out sometimes, reread it, try to figure out if there's a version of the future where we have some kind of relationship. She was the only one who kept evidence, the only one whose guilt outweighed her fear of the family. She's the reason the case could be prosecuted at all, but she also watched me suffer for years and said nothing. She came to family dinners where I was treated like a broken toy and played along. She benefited from my destruction just like the rest of them, even if she felt bad about it. I don't know if that's forgivable. I don't know if I want to find out. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never overheard that conversation at the funeral. If Derek had been less drunk, if they'd gone inside. If I'd left 5 minutes earlier, I'd still be living that half-life, still believing I was guilty, still grateful for whatever scraps of affection my family threw my way. The thought terrifies me, how close I came to dying without ever knowing I'd been murdered. But I did overhear, I did find out, and I did something about it, which is more than that scared 26-year-old could have imagined possible. That has to count for something. Rachel asked me last week if I think I'll ever be happy, truly happy, or if this is always going to be hanging over me. I told her I don't know, which is the truth, but I also told her that I'm closer now than I've been in 12 years. And that feels like progress. She kissed me and said progress is enough for now. Maybe she's right. Maybe healing isn't about reaching some finish line where everything is okay again. Maybe it's just about moving forward, one day at a time, building something new from whatever pieces are left. I'm trying. Some days I'm trying harder than others, but I'm trying. And I'm here. I survived. They tried to dispose of me, tried to break me so thoroughly that I'd never be able to put myself back together. They failed. I'm still standing. I'm still breathing. I'm still capable of love and joy and hope, even if those things feel foreign sometimes. They didn't win. And maybe, eventually, that will be enough.